They were hunted, they were beaten, they were sentenced to die. In the darkest corners of history, men and women faced the ultimate end, yet they never once denied what they held to be true. These are not stories of legends carved in stone, but of human beings who stood firm when the world demanded they break. Imagine the cold steel of a blade against your throat, or the suffocating silence of a prison cell. Imagine the choice between your life and your conviction. These three figures faced death without fear, not because they were devoid of feeling, but because their resolve outweighed their instinct for survival. We look back at their sacrifice, and we see a different kind of strength, one that defies the logic of the world. But as we walk through their final moments, the distance between their reality and yours begins to shrink. Would you stand your ground? Or would you walk away? Peter Chanel crossed the vast, churning oceans to reach a land where his message was forbidden. He stepped onto the shore, a stranger in a place governed by ancient, rigid traditions. At first, the islanders gathered in the shade of the palms, listening with cautious curiosity. His words were different. They spoke of a life beyond the immediate, a promise that challenged the status quo. Slowly, the circle of listeners grew. One by one, the islanders began to believe, casting aside old allegiances. But every conversion was a crack in the foundation of the island's existing order. High above, the local leaders watched. They did not see a man of peace. They saw a threat to their authority. The air in the village grew heavy with unspoken tension. The leaders prepared to act before the shift became permanent. The mission had succeeded too well, and now the price was coming due. One morning, the peace shattered. The hut door splintered inward as the leaders stormed inside. There was no debate, no final warning, and no chance for defense. They struck with calculated force. Peter Chanel fell to the dirt, the impact jarring his breath away. They did not stop. He was beaten repeatedly. His body dragged across the rough, jagged ground toward the center of the village. Dust coated his skin, and the sharp stones tore at him. Yet he did not fight back. He did not raise a hand to deflect a single blow. He did not curse his attackers, nor did he beg for his life. He remained entirely silent, his eyes fixed on the horizon, accepting his fate with a stillness that unsettled those who held the weapons. As the final blow landed, the village fell into a heavy, suffocating quiet. The leaders stood over him, expecting a final plea, but there was only stillness. It appeared that evil had claimed the day. The setting shifted from the tropical sun to the gray, suffocating confines of a concentration camp. Here, the value of a human life was stripped away, reduced to a number tattooed on an arm. The air tasted of ash and damp earth. Every day was a struggle for the barest scrap of existence. Then, the alarm sounded. A prisoner had escaped. The guards moved through the barracks with mechanical precision, their faces devoid of recognition or mercy. They lined the men up in the yard, the cold wind biting through the thin layers of their reality. The commander walked the line, pointing a gloved finger at 10 individuals. Among the chosen, a man broke down, his shoulders shaking as he sobbed. "My wife, my children, I will never see them again." The guards did not pause. The man collapsed, his grief echoing against the concrete walls. From the back of the formation, Maximilian Kolbe stepped out. He stopped in front of the man who had been chosen. He looked at the guards and spoke. "I am a priest. I will take his place." The heavy iron door groaned shut, sealing them into the dark. Outside, the camp continued its mechanical grind, but inside, the air grew thick with the scent of stagnant breath and impending death. At first, the cell was a cacophony of raw, jagged sound. Men clawed at the walls, their voices cracking as they screamed for mercy, for water, for an end to the agony. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the shallow, rhythmic gasping of those already failing. Then, a voice rose above the chaos. It was steady, low, and clear. Maximilian Kolbe began to pray. He did not shout. He simply spoke the words into the void. One by one, the frantic movements slowed. The desperate clawing against the concrete ceased. The screams withered away, replaced by the soft, rhythmic cadence of prayers. The guards, peering through the small observation slot, found no panic, no weeping, and no pleas for release. The cell, designed to be a place of final despair, transformed into a sanctuary. Love had entered the chamber, and it was far stronger than the hunger. Days bled into nights within the concrete box. The hunger was a physical weight, pulling at their limbs and clouding their senses. Yet, the prayers never faltered. Maximilian Kolbe remained the anchor, his voice a steady thread in the suffocating silence. The guards outside grew restless. They expected the screams of broken men, but they were met with a quiet, persistent dignity that unsettled them. On the final day, the heavy door swung open. The guards stepped in, their faces tight with a mixture of confusion and irritation. They found the men slumped against the walls, weak and hollowed by starvation, but their eyes were clear. Kolbe sat at the center, his head bowed, his breathing shallow. When the guard raised his weapon, Kolbe did not flinch. He did not beg, he simply looked up, his gaze meeting the guard's with a terrifying, calm clarity. The guard hesitated, his hand trembling for a fraction of a second before he acted. The act was swift, but the victory was not the guard's. As Kolbe's life ebbed away, the atmosphere in the camp shifted. Love had proven stronger than the fear of death, leaving behind a legacy of hope. The battlefield fell silent, and the banners were lowered. Joan of Arc, once the architect of improbable victories, found herself confined within the stone walls of a damp cell. The war had shifted from open fields to the suffocating confines of a courtroom. Her captors did not want her blood immediately. They wanted her submission. They brought her before a panel of judges, men who wielded law as a weapon. They demanded she recant the voices she claimed to hear. They presented documents, twisting her words, searching for a single contradiction. Joan sat on a hard wooden bench, her hands resting on her knees. She listened to the accusations, the sharp questions, and the threats of torture. The judges leaned forward, their voices echoing off the cold masonry, pressuring her to admit that her visions were nothing more than delusions. They offered her a path to freedom. Sign a paper, deny the divine, and walk away. The room grew still, the weight of the choice pressed down on her. She looked at the judges, her gaze steady and unyielding. She refused to bargain. She refused to lie. She would not retreat. The stone walls of the cell gave way to the open air of the market square. A wooden stake stood at the center, surrounded by a sea of faces. The crowd pressed in, their voices a rising tide of jeers and demands. Joan walked toward the center, her steps measured and deliberate. She reached the wood and felt the rough texture of the ropes as they bound her. The first torch touched the kindling. Smoke curled upward, thick and acrid, stinging the eyes. Then, the heat arrived. It was a physical wall, expanding outward. The flames licked at the base of the wood, climbing higher with a hungry, rhythmic roar. The crowd fell into a sudden, uneasy silence. The heat intensified, searing the air, but Joan did not scream. She did not plead for mercy or turn her head to escape the searing glow. She stood anchored in the center of the inferno, her eyes fixed on the sky. As the flames rose to meet her, she opened her mouth. Her voice cut through the roar, clear and unwavering, calling out, "Jesus." The name remained the final, lingering vibration in the square. These figures were not carved from stone or born with hearts of iron. They were human, possessing the same capacity for pain, the same instinct for self-preservation, and the same vulnerability to doubt that you face every day. They felt the cold in the cell, the hunger in the camp, and the searing heat of the pyre. They were not superheroes who lacked the ability to feel terror. They were individuals who felt the weight of their circumstances and chose to stand firm regardless. They did not seek out suffering, yet they refused to abandon their convictions when the cost became everything. Now, the narrative shifts from them to you. Look at your own life, your own values, and the moments where your integrity is tested. If the pressure were to mount, if your comfort were stripped away, and if the path of least resistance demanded you walk away from what you know to be true, what would you do? Would you stand or would you retreat? Faith is not a static belief held in safety. It is a life lived in the face of consequence. It is the decision to remain anchored when the world demands you drift. If this message has challenged your perspective, subscribe to Whispers of Faith. Consider this not just a story, but a mirror. The question remains yours to answer.